Are you looking for the best camera for under $1,000? Are you looking to shoot up to 4K video with accurate and reliable autofocus? Or are you looking for the perfect stills camera? Or perhaps you're looking for a general purpose camera that shoots both video and stills very well in pretty much every scenario. I'm going to provide you with a breakdown of this segment and recommend the best camera for stills and video for under $1,000. Thanks for tuning in to The Ordinary Filmmaker. Subscribe to get notification of new videos like this one so you don't miss any news, rumors, gear reviews, or tutorials. And a big thanks to Atomos for sponsoring The Ordinary Filmmaker. I'm using the Ninja 5 external recorder for all my studio work as it saves me a ton of time in post. So if you want to speed up your projects in post, consider using my links down below to purchase your own Ninja. It also helps support this channel. And now for the review. I'm going to review a wide range of cameras from micro four thirds all the way to full frame, from video-centric to still-centric cameras. And I'm also going to include DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. It's a real hodgepodge. And each one of these cameras is going to cost under $1,000. Well, I would say under $1,000, but some of these, once you put a lens on them, is going to go over $1,000, but you can get some of these for as little as $549. First up is the Olympus OMD EM10 Mark IV. It has a micro four thirds sensor capable of 20.3 megapixels, an LCD screen with 1 million dots, and an EVF with 2.4 million dots. Now, before I go any further, I probably should explain the difference between sensor sizes. Now, a micro four thirds sensor is the smallest we'll cover today. Next, the APS-C, followed by full frame sensors. Now, the larger the sensor, generally the more light it can receive and the less noise it produces, but the larger we go, the more power is required to process images and video, and when underpowered, you get some pretty significant rolling shutter. Now, larger sensor cameras also cost more, as do their lenses. Anyhow, so let's get back to the EM10 Mark IV. It can shoot an incredible 15 frames per second electronic, but that does drop down to 8.7 frames when you're shooting mechanical, and drops even further to about 4.5 frames when you're using burst continuous autofocus. It can shoot 4K video at 24, 25, and 30 frames per second, so it gives you all the basic frame rates. And you can get up to 60 frames per second slow motion in 1080. And it also has a pretty reliable and solid autofocus system. Better still, it sells for $799, and that's in kit form with a 14 to 42 f3.5 to 5.6, so it does give you a complete system, taxes in, for under $1,000. And if you just want the body, it's $699. Now, the EM10 Mark IV is a good buy for the price, and if you're serious about the EM10, you should be aware that Olympus was recently spun off and is now called OM Digital, although they still use the Olympus name and sometimes OM Digital in the same breath, so that's a little confusing. But based on recent communications, it looks like OM Digital or Olympus is going to be around for quite a long time, so you're not going to have to worry about support. Next up is the beautiful retro-style Fuji X-T30. I just absolutely love how Fuji designs their cameras. I think one of my favorite designs is the X-T4, the silver version. It's got that beautiful retro look, and of all the cameras out there, I gotta say that Fuji has some of the best designs. Anyhow, back to the comparison between these cameras. The the X-T30, unlike the EM10, it has a 26.1 megapixel APS-C back illuminated sensor. So it's one of the highest resolution sensors we're going to compare here today, and also one of the few that has a back illuminated sensor. Essentially, they can capture more light, performing better in low light than other APS-C sensors or other APS-C cameras without this capability. Now, it has an autofocus system with 425 phase detect points that is spread across the entire frame. Burst still shooting up to a staggering 30 frames per second. That's pretty powerful. But you do have a 1.25 times crop at this speed. Now, if you're willing to drop down to 20 frames per second, that crop completely goes away. Now, like the EM10, the X-T30 has a 2.36 million dot OLED viewfinder. It has a 3-inch LCD, but it's limited to 1 million dots like the EM10. But unlike the EM10, the Fuji the X-T30 is capable of DCI and UHD 4K video at 24, 25, and 30 frames per second. And this has to be one of the most feature-rich video cameras in this price segment. And, well, are you ready for this? You also get the option of 10-bit 422 if you're willing to shoot through an external recorder, so it outputs 10-bit 422 over HDMI. And I'm actually recording with the Ninja 5 external recorder too, so if you spent an extra $5.99, you could put an external recorder on there and get that 10-bit 422. So it gives you that extra capability that if you want to grow into something like that, it's certainly something available. And I can tell you from shooting 10-bit 422, wow, once you shoot that, you just can't go back. I shot a video last year, and I shot it with my new R5. I shot it in 4K HQ, so a very detailed 8K oversampled 4K. But I shot in 8-bit. I was getting used to the camera. And then towards the end of last year, I started shooting in 10-bit, and the difference is just truly incredible. You're able to get all that detail in the shadows as well as the highlights and throughout the midtones. It's just absolutely powerful. And for $8.99, I've got to say that the Fuji X-T30 is one of the best cameras in this price range. Now, it doesn't have any in-body image stabilization, and a feature which is very helpful for reducing camera shake. And it's not just used for video, it's also good in stills. So when you're shooting in low light, you're able to get those shots at a higher shutter speed or a lower shutter speed without having any motion blur, which is really awesome. Still, this has to be one of my top picks in this segment for video. Well, as a video and stills hybrid camera, I think it's one of the best ones you can purchase. Nikon has a solid entry in the under $1,000 segment with the Z50. Now, the Nikon Z50 has an APS-C 20.9 megapixel sensor. It's not the biggest. It can shoot up to 11 frames per second, stills with autofocus and auto exposure, although that drops to 5 frames per second when shooting in live view. Now, like every other camera mentioned in this segment, the Z50 can shoot 4K video without a crop at 24, 25, and 30 frames per second, and up to 120 frames per second in 1080. Now, slow motion at 120 frames per second is something that I just absolutely love, and I think it's something that if you haven't tried, once you try it, you're going to grow to love it. I couldn't imagine shooting video without it. It's just one of those tools essential for telling the story. Like Fuji and Olympus, it has a 2.4 million dot EVF, and it has a slightly larger tilting LCD at 3.2 inches. It's definitely a solid camera, and the recent firmware updates provide a solid autofocus system. But, like the Fuji, it doesn't have in-body image stabilization, though that's pretty common in this segment. You have to spend quite a bit more to get that feature. But at $699 for the body, it's another top pick as an all-round solid stills and video hybrid camera. Now, next on my list is the Sony A6400. It's another APS-C camera. The A6400 sports a 24.2 megapixel APS-C sensor with a low-resolution 3-inch tilt screen. Although it does have a 921,000 dot resolution, you're not really going to find any other EVFs and LCDs with resolutions much higher in this price segment. Now, it does have a 2.36 million dot EVF, a 425-point phase detect autofocus system, which is right up there with Canon in terms of accuracy and reliability. I'd have to say that Canon and Sony are leading the innovation when it comes to autofocus. Now, the camera does have an ISO range of between 100 and 32,000, which is a little higher again than many cameras. And as far as stills rate, it can shoot up to 11 frames per second, which isn't super fast, but it can shoot 8 frames per second in silent shutter. And I would say for the ordinary filmmaker, photographer, if you're just doing general purpose stuff, anything above or right around 7 frames per second is more than enough for you to do high-speed shooting. Now, as far as video goes, it can shoot video up to 4K at 24, 25, and 30 frames per second, and up to 120 frames per second in 1080. Now, while the A6400 doesn't have in-body image stabilization, the biggest concern for the beginner, well, that has to be the menu system. And I can hear some of you saying, oh, Simon, don't go on about the menu system. But Sony's old menu system is a mess. It's counterintuitive. Now, I did have the Sony A7S III in here, and I shot for 2 weeks, and I found it was very clearly laid out. It was concise. It made sense. And I was able to start shooting with a Sony A7S III right away. And I'd never shot with a Sony before. So the A6400's old menu system will take time to learn, but you will become familiar with it. And once you do, it's going to become second nature. Now, if you are familiar with Sony, well, then don't hesitate to consider the A6400. It's an excellent stills and video hybrid camera. Now, the Canon M50, it has a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor, but unlike Sony, Canon decided to go with a different mount for its APS-C mirrorless camera. And while you can adapt EF and EFS lenses for not much more than $50, if you purchase any native EFM lenses, you're not going to be able to migrate them to any other Canon system, leaving you without an upgrade path unless, of course, you just stick to buying EF lenses. The Canon M50 can shoot 10 frames per second stills, but that does drop down to about 7.4 frames per second with continuous autofocus. And why on earth would you want to shoot without continuous autofocus? Now, this is more than respectable for any camera in this price range. And like other cameras in this price range, it has a 2.4 million dot EVF and a low resolution LCD. But the real benefit here is the LCD, well, it's a fully articulating flip screen. So that's one of the benefits you get over the other cameras in this price range, which just have an articulating screen, which if you're shooting any sort of video and you want that flip screen turned out, you don't get that with the other cameras. So that's a big benefit here. And I absolutely swear by the feature, especially if you're getting older and you don't enjoy laying down on the ground to get the shot. Now, while the M50 can shoot 4K video, it's limited to 24 frames per second, so no 30. Well, it also gets 25, so if you're on a PAL system, you will get 25 frames per second. But with that 24 frames per second, you get a 1.7 times crop. And as Canon APS-C sensors already have a 1.6 times crop, 4K turns out to, well, it takes pretty much any lens and turns it into a telephoto lens. Now, slow motion is possible at 60 frames per second in 1080 or 120 frames per second in 720. And while it's a solid stills camera, the video capabilities of the M50 are lacking against the competition in this price range, despite allowing for YouTube live streaming. Now, if you're primarily a video shooter, you're going to outgrow the M50 very quickly and should consider other cameras. But if 1080 is all you need, it might be enough. However, you should know that 1080 video isn't very detailed. Now, priced at $649, the M50 won't break the bank and is a solid stills camera. You might also consider the Canon SL3. It's essentially a DSLR version of the M50, but the SL3 is capable of well over 1,000 shots on a single battery charge, making it a really good solid travel camera, and it's lightweight too. So if you're a still shooter, I'd still consider the SL3 over the M50, and if you eventually move up to the R system, those EF lenses or even EFS lenses can be adapted for $100. Sadly, those EFM lenses can't be adapted to the R system, leaving you without any upgrade path. Now, our last camera here is the Canon RP. It's the only full-frame mirrorless camera in this segment that sells for under $1,000. The Canon RP currently sells for $999, but often goes on sale for $899. And if the rumors are true that we're getting a replacement for this camera this year, we could see it go as low as $799. And the RP has a 26.2 full-frame sensor with Canon's accurate and reliable dual-pixel autofocus. While Canon advertises it with 8 frames per second, it's not exactly true. You're most likely going to get no more than 4 frames per second with continuous autofocus. And video-wise, it can shoot up to 4K, again at 24 or 25 frames per second, and has a large 1.7 times crop, so the same as the M50. Now, while this might seem large, it offers better 4K video than other APS-C cameras you're working with, and because you're working with a full-frame sensor, that crop isn't going to be as significant. Essentially, it brings you back to the same crop level performance that you're going to get with other APS-Cs, and less of a crop with the Micro Four Thirds, because most Micro Four Thirds sensors provide you with a 2 times crop. Now, a notable mention is eye autofocus, and I really love this. It's going to help you nail the perfect portrait every time, especially if you're going to pop on a lens like a 50mm f1.2. Eye autofocus is essential. Now, the Canon RP is an excellent entry-level full-frame mirrorless camera. It has much better low-light performance than all the other cameras I've talked about in this video, and it has better bokeh. This camera, with the right lens, allows you to easily separate the subject from the background, and you can do so easily with a nifty 50, which is around $200. And as a stills camera, the RP is an excellent choice and my top pick over other cameras in this video. But for video shooters, it's just too lacking. It has terrible rolling shutter. It's got that slow Digic 8 sensor that came out in, 2016? And it provides relatively soft 4K video and doesn't offer 120 frames per second. Worst of all, Canon's dual pixel autofocus isn't available in 4K, leaving you with contrast detect, something they borrowed from Panasonic. Now, if you're primarily a still shooter, as I said, the RP has got to be the best camera of the bunch here and at a solid price. But when it comes to the perfect camera for the ordinary filmmaker, well, the field narrows significantly. While there are a few Canon cameras in this segment, there isn't a camera in this price segment that excites me. And none of them, if you buy them, are really going to allow you to grow as a video shooter. Video features are just far too crippled. 4K is often cropped and limited to 24 frames per second. Rolling shutter can be severe, and in some cameras, autofocus is removed in 4K, such as the RP, and 120 frames per second in the RP is nowhere to be seen. And if you're looking for a Canon camera with good video, well, unfortunately, I think you're going to have to look outside of this price segment. I'd seriously look towards a Canon 90D. Now, while it starts at $11.99, just outside of this price barrier, it does often go on sale for $10.99. And it's essentially the best Canon hybrid camera outside of the much more expensive Canon R5. If you're not tied to Canon, consider the Fuji X-T30 for its impressive video capabilities. Now, the Olympus EM10 is a close second. It has solid stills and video capabilities, as does the Nikon Z50 and the Sony a6400. Now, each of these cameras offers great video capabilities, with the Fuji topping out by providing 10-bit 422 external video over HDMI. Now, you're not going to find IBIS in any of these cameras, and Sony does have a confusing menu system that is going to take you time to learn, but they all provide very good video capabilities that are going to allow you to grow. Now, while each camera does have solid autofocus, I'd consider Sony having the best. Oh, and one last thought. Don't let your budget be your only deciding factor. I want you to think roadmap. Think how long you want to shoot with this camera. Think how long you want to be shooting in 3 to 5 years as a time frame, and consider which camera is going to allow you to grow and meet the capabilities over that time frame. Graph out the capabilities you're looking at. Like I've done here, and what I've done is I've looked at all the different capabilities, from detailed video in 4K and 1080, autofocus and all that, and then color code them anywhere from green, orange, and yellow or red, identifying which ones do it best. And what this will do is give you a simple decision-making tool that takes all that detail, that abstraction, and puts it into one simple visual that allows you to see which camera best meets your capabilities. And then the only thing I would do differently is, over top of that, maybe outline them in black or some other color to identify which ones you consider as absolutely mandatory capabilities. And this is going to help you decide on which is the best camera for you, because while I've identified the cameras that I think are the best in terms of stills and video capabilities, as a general for most people, yours, well, they're going to be different from mine. They're going to be different from everybody else who's watching. So using this tool, go ahead and make it your own. I simply use PowerPoint or Keynote and just create simple boxes with an outline, and then I provide a simple color. But simply just look at the ones that I've got here. Are these capabilities what you're looking for? Change them, alter them, copy them, do with them as you wish, and it's really going to help you provide a much better decision-making tool to get you the camera that's best for you. Don't focus on specs. Specs can be very misleading. All of these cameras provide 4K video, but they provide it very differently. Oh, and also you need to consider the lenses that are available to the system. The body, quite often for most professional photographers, isn't the most important thing. It's the lenses. Once you've got the body, it's the lens that allows you to capture the world. So if the system doesn't have the lenses you're looking for, that could be a significant challenge for you in picking the right camera. So you really want to look at that as well. Now, if you're just looking for an overall general purpose lens, well, then most of these cameras will have that. Now, what I like to look at is something that's also wide, but allows you to zoom in as well. Some cameras will have something from like an 18 to 135 millimeter. I think that's a perfect range. Some will have 24 to 240. You might have 24 to 105. And those are really good. But if you get something like that's a 24 to 40 or 24 to 50, you are going to find that lens to be rather limiting. And it's great for wide shots, but you're not going to be able to zoom in. You also might want to consider getting a prime to start off if this is your first camera. What primes teach you to do is how to frame the subject properly, and it really helps you. So something like a nifty 50, you can get a 50mm lens quite cheap. Even on Canon's expensive R system, you can get one of their RF nifty 50 lenses for under $200. Also, consider saving just a little bit longer to get the camera you need. By increasing your budget by another $500, many more options will open up to you. If you have any questions regarding anything I've said in this video, or anything that I've left out, go ahead and post your questions in the comment section down below. And also, I recommend that you go ahead and subscribe if you want to stay on top of all the latest news and reviews. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and you also have a chance of winning 2 Angelbird 128GB AV Pro MK2 V90 SD cards, along with a dual UHS-2 card reader. Or you could also win a Ulanzi LED light package with accent lights, underwater lights, or various other flat panel lights to light your subject, or it's a very good starter kit for someone starting their own channel. And if you want to help support this channel, please use my links to buy your cameras of choice, your lenses, at B&H and Amazon.com. And by using my links down below, it doesn't cost you any extra. You'll see the price you pay is exactly the same as if you went to B&H and Amazon yourself. But the difference is I get a 2% fee back that helps support this channel. You could also consider buying the Ordinary Filmmaker baseball cap for $34.99 at ordinaryfilmmaker.com. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.